Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Sunday morning Tanya class. We're still in the middle of chapter 29. Hopefully we concluded today. We are on page 129. And we are at the bottom of the left column by the circle, beginning with the words the longer. So as I told you, I would give a little introduction today. I was asked before, what's the difference between the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and Klipa? See, a lot of what we were talking about till now related to the idea, to this concept called Klipa and Sitra Achra, the other side. There's a big difference between Klipa, which means a shell, a peel, which I explained many times means that which conceals over the truth that there's only one existence in this world, which is God himself. He is it. There's nothing else. But Klipa conceals that truth. And Klipa presents a falsehood that other things and other entities exist as well. But Klipa in itself is not in direct opposition. It's not going to fight God if it doesn't have to. The Yetzer Hara is the opposition of God. He is looking to derail and drive a person to do and act and think and speak things that are sinful, things that are opposite, the antithesis to God. So the Yetzer Hara is in opposition to God. Klipa conceals God. Let me explain the difference. Take this tree outside, or this table. Is this part of the Klipa reality? It is. Yeah. When you look at the table, it's covering the reality that God is the creator of this table. But is this table evil? Would you call this table evil, bad? No. In a sense, it could be bad, because if it's concealing the truth and it's presenting a falsehood that this table exists independent of God, then it's a problem. But the difference is that this table can now, you take this table and use it for something godly and holy and purposeful. So you took away the concealment. You can remove the klipa from this table. You can remove the klipa from that tree and from most of this world. You cannot remove the klipa from the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara's whole purpose is to oppose God, to get you to do that which is opposite God. Now, your nefesh habahamis, which means your human, or as we call it, the animalistic soul within the human being, within the Jew, is part of the klipa reality. Is the nefesh habahamis, that's the animating soul. That makes you tick, that makes you live, as opposed to a dead body which is lifeless. So the nefesh habahamis is what makes you live. That's your identity as a human being. Is that necessarily in opposition to God? I explained this many times. Its driving force is self-centered perpetuation. It wants to perpetuate itself. It's totally driven to self-centered ends. Nothing anti-God. It's an ally of self. It wants to preserve self and enhance itself. So, for example, if you can convince the nefesh habahamis, your human soul, that learning Tanya is a very, very good thing, it'll enhance the self, it'll make the person, it'll give you pleasure, it's going to go on to learn Tanya. The nefesh habahamis is natural. Its natural disposition is to be drawn after good food, physical pleasures of the flesh, and so on and so forth. But if you can, and many have, convinced and worked there with their human soul to appreciate some of the more fine aspects of life, intellectual pursuits, to even Torah pursuits. The human soul is not in opposition to Torah. It's not in opposition to God. If it can be convinced that God is pleasurable to it, it will want a relationship with God. Yetzer Hara doesn't. Yetzer Hara's whole reason d'etre is to oppose God. So that's the big difference. The problem is, the Alter Rebbe in this chapter is the problem with the problem that the Alter Rebbe is dealing with in this chapter, as we spoke in the last few classes, is a person who is experiencing a dullness of heart. He's stuck. He can't motivate himself to have a feeling for something more refined, for something more spiritual, for God. Even though he knows the truth, he's fully aware that God is the only real passion that one should have in life, and so on. But when it gets to the heart is not moved by it. By that which the mind knows, the heart is just not responding. And Alter Rebbe explained that that's because the klipa reality within the human soul has become so coarse. It's become so pampered to over the years that it just klipa, when you give into it too much, it ends up blocking the light of godliness, the light of your soul. And the way to rid yourself from this is to break it down a little bit, break down the klipa a little bit, right? That's what the Alter Rebbe was discussing in the first half of this chapter. And the Alter Rebbe went on to explain that sometimes you have to actually face klipa, talk to it, face it down, break it down, say to it, you are despicable. Because think about it, why is it despicable? Because it presents a falsehood. It presents the ultimate falsehood. What's the ultimate truth? God. God is the only truth. The whole existence of everything else in this world is to perpetuate, is to be an extension of God's truth. The moment klipa presents itself as something important outside of the reality of God or independent of God, it's the ultimate falsehood. But that falsehood is very powerful. It gets the better of us. We're this, it's the way we're born. We're born to feel ourselves, to know ourselves, to recognize ourselves, to think of ourselves as important. When I'm hungry, I need to eat. And when I'm tired, I need to sleep. And when I want something, I need to go get it, and so on. There's the I, the big I, is very, very powerful. That self-centered, passion. So what do you have to do? Talk down to it. There's a liar standing in front of you. You have to tell him in his face, "You're a liar." If that kind of reality presents itself and with chutzpah and with audacity presents itself as something that is what it isn't, you have to tell it, right? You have to speak to it and say, "You are presenting a falsehood." The Alter Rebbe is saying this is the klipa reality that within every one of us. We must talk it down, tell it in its face, you are despicable. Because when you're falsehood ultimately is despicable. So as long as we're eating in order to serve God, we're sleeping in order to serve God, then you're part of God's oneness. That's the way it should be. But if you're eating and sleeping and pursuing your pleasures because you feel you want these things, because it tastes good to your palate and it feels good to your just for that reason, that means you're separated from God. That's a problem. And the more you do that, the more coarse you become, the less sensitive you become to spiritual matters, and then you come 20, 30 years later and say, why am I not feeling this passion for God? Why am I not feeling a certain relationship? Why am I not excited about this? That's the reason. And he continues over here, and this is where I want to begin today. The longer he will reflect on these matters in his thoughts, delving deeply also into books, in order to break down his heart within him, and render himself shamed and despised in his own eyes, as is written in the scriptures, so utterly despised that he despises his very life. It doesn't mean that he wants to commit suicide, God forbid. He means the falsehood of life, It's despicable in him. The more he despises and degrades, in other words, the klipa of his life, the more he despises and degrades thereby the sitra achra, casting it down to the ground and humbling it from its haughtiness and pride and self-exaltation, wherewith it exalts itself over the light of the holiness of the divine soul, obscuring its effulgence. That's what it does. The klipa is in opposition, by definition, to your soul. Not because it hates your soul, because it's presenting itself as something that it exists besides God, outside of God, or independent of God. That in itself is in opposition to the soul, which is God. Let me cite an example. Well, before I cite the example, let me read another few lines. He must also thunder. The Alter Rebbe now goes and says, you have to actually say this in your mind. You have to actually talk to the Yetzer Hara, to your evil inclination and your animalistic soul. You have to talk to it in your mind, not with your mouth, obviously, but with your mind. You have to think the following. He must also thunder against it with a strong and raging voice in order to humble it. As the rabbis state, this is in the Talmud, a person should always rouse the good impulse against the evil impulse. As it is written, rage and sin not. That is to say, one must rage against his animal soul, which is his evil impulse, with stormy indignation in his mind, saying to it, "Thou art evil, thou wicked, abominable, loathsome, and disgraceful," with all the epithets of that by which our sages of blessed memory have rightly called it. How long wilt thou conceal me from the light of the blessed Ein Sof, meaning God, which pervades all the worlds, which was, is, and will be the same, including also in this place where I stand. God, the only truth is that God exists right now, always has, and will never change, even in this place right now in this room. Just as the light of the blessed Ein Sof was alone before the world was created, without any change, as is written, for I, the Lord, have not changed, for he transcends time and so forth. How long are you going to obscure this? That's what you have to thunder against is, how could you do this? But thou, who is repulsive, dost deny the truth, which is plain to see by physical sight, that everything in his presence is truly like nothing at all. Before God, there's nothing. I want to stop here for a second. Let me explain something. Let me cite an example. The example I want to cite is as follows. So you get what he's saying over here. What is the Alter Rebbe saying? You have to talk down to your human soul. Well, it sounds like a little primitive stuff, a little bit, right? But it really doesn't. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in your house, and you're feeling good. Something really good happened in your life, and you really want to thank, and you're very thankful for it. We just came from Thanksgiving, right? We feel thankful for the good things we have. Imagine some kind of really miraculous thing happened. You were very sick, and you thought you were going to die. And God helped. With good doctors, you survived it. You got through it. You had cancer, and you survived it. You feel very thankful, right? What do? Some people would throw a party, invite friends, right? Family, friends. They to thank Hashem. It's called a Sudat Hoda'ah. A meal of Thanksgiving for God. Just like we had Thanksgiving on Thursday night. But Thanksgiving on Thursday night, everyone did. Just once a year they do it. But imagine you had something this year that happened horrendous in your life, and you got through it. God was with you. Now you're feeling really thankful. You invite your friends, and you invite your family, and everyone's there to celebrate with you. You start the party at 6 o'clock in the evening. At 10 o'clock it winds down. You hope everyone goes home and you can clean up and go to bed, right? Imagine a few people hang around and they're not leaving. Not only they're not leaving, they look at you and they don't even know who you are. They deny that you're even the boss of this house. They made themselves come. They start moving around the furniture. They got too comfortable in your own house. They start moving around your furniture. They start owning the house. They start doing what they want in your house. Right? And the host comes over to them and says, okay, it's late, you had a nice time, you had good food, good drink, be thankful, be a mensch, go home, it's time. Who are you? They tell the host, who are you over here? Don't tell me what to do. I live here now. And he moves in a squatter. He's a squatter. Could you imagine such a thing? It's unthinkable, right? Who would ever behave that way? What would you do if you want, what would be the right attitude towards someone that behaves that way? Some would say you call the police and get him out and finished, right? Don't waste your time, that's it, remember. But if you don't want to do that, you're not sure you want to go that far. Try to talk to him and say, look, what's wrong with you? You don't own this house. This is my house. I invited you in. Be a mensch. Be thankful. Show some decency. But the person is obstinate and says, I don't think this should only belong to you. This is also my house. Why are you the only one that can live here? I want to live here. Imagine this craziness. I need a house. I'm homeless. I don't have where to stay. So, you need 5 rooms? You only have 3 kids. What do you need 5 rooms? I'm going to take one of them. You invited him in to celebrate with you your party, your kindness, your goodness, your happiness, and he now moved in and he doesn't want to leave. When you realize that this person is really, got this crazy idea in his mind that he is now an equal owner of this house with you, you realize you got a problem with this person. What are you going to start telling him? Well, you don't remember you got an invitation from me? I was the one that sent you the invitation. That's not going to work. Niceties are not going to do it. Your son probably would come over to this guy and start screaming at him. Are you out of your mind? How despicable. That's what you would tell him. What kind of despicable person are you? You ate a whole evening, you had the best food. You had the best music. You had the best entertainment. You had the best environment, the best people. We gave you the best thing. You're sitting here and you're going to do this to us? What kind of sick person are you? You would scream at this person. You would say, where did you grow up? Who raised you? Where did you come up with this kind of attitude? You'd shout him down, right? Because the guy isn't he's lying in this through. He's lying to you. He's saying I'm an equal owner of this house. It's absolute falsehood. He's not an equal owner. He doesn't own anything in this house. He's here by the graces of the owner, and he now is taken over. You got to shut this down. You have to break this down. If you think about it, that is our life story. That is our life story. That's how we behave. We're the squatter in this world. God invited us into this world. He said, I'm giving you everything of this world. You can eat. You can enjoy you can enjoy this world. You can enjoy everything I gave you. I gave you everything. I'm going to give you everything. You can enjoy the music. You can enjoy the food. You can enjoy the place, the weather, the sun, the moon, you name it. I'm asking you for one thing. Don't move the furniture in my own house. And never forget that this is my house. That's it. That's all I'm asking. Eat the food, enjoy everything. But never tell me that you're the owner of this house. That's I'm asking. That's all I'm asking. Is don't tell me you're the owner. What does it mean you're the owner? When it's no longer about the host. You forget that that you came to celebrate with the host. So the food that you're eating, is anything wrong with the food? He wants you to eat the food. The host wants you to eat the food. He wants you to drink the good drinks. He wants you to have pleasure at his party. One thing he doesn't want, you to ever forget that this is his party. Because when you forget that it's his party, that you're here for him, to celebrate him, it's downhill from there. Imagine you went to a wedding. I gave this example before. Imagine you went to a wedding. Same exact idea. You invited to a wedding, right? 500 people there. The guy's a millionaire. He put out the smorgasbord. I mean, it's the dream of every person. That's a dream wedding, right? And then you forget that there's a bride, there's a groom, there's a mechutin. You don't even realize where you are. You forgot that there's a wedding. You forgot that there's a bride, there's a groom. You're dancing away the night by yourself. You don't care. And then someone asks you, why are you here? I don't know. I'm here because I'm here. There's no bride, there's no groom, there's no host, there's no father, there's no mother. I am here because I feel like being here. Could you imagine how despicable that is? So you say, but the host invited me to enjoy this food. Yes, you're right, he invited you to enjoy this food, but he wants you to never forget that why he invited you to this wedding. It's a wedding. He wants you to celebrate with him. But we come to this world, into this physical world, we're born into this world, and very quickly we forget who invited us here. We eat, we drink, we're merry, we celebrate, we go on vacations, we enjoy. We buy cars, we buy houses, we buy stuff. We enjoy this world that God gave us, but we forget that there's a host. We're invited for a reason. That's a falsehood. That's the falsehood Alter Rebbe is talking about in this chapter. How dare we do that? But we do. Now, we wonder why later, when we want to have a feeling for the host, we don't have it. How could you have it? You forgot about him 20 years ago, you forgot about him. Or you thought about yourself too much. I don't mean completely forgot about him. It's a balance, obviously. There's degrees in this. But we're so engrossed in our own, so most of us think of it, we don't want to forget about God altogether. So we want a relationship with God, so we'll give him an hour a day. We go to daven, okay, I gave God his hour. But the rest of the day is mine. You understand? So there's degrees. Some people don't even give him an hour a day. Some don't give him an hour a week. Some don't give him an hour a year. They completely forgot about him. They came into the wedding and they just, the minute they walked in, there's no bride, there's no nothing. So most people are not such, most good people will not be that to that degree. But they'll give God an hour. The rest, it's my time. It's just like going to that wedding and giving the host 5 minutes to say hello, and the rest he forgets about it. Every minute you're at that wedding, you don't. A mensch doesn't forget about the fact that there's a bride and groom. You're there for them. Enjoy every minute of it, but you're part of a party. You're part of a celebration of the people who invited you into this party. And if you forget that for even a minute, you don't belong there anymore. Imagine that he comes to you, you invite people into your house, and they forget that you're the owner. Even for 1 minute, you don't belong. The minute you forget that, it's time to leave. But we think, and we present ourselves, Klippa presents itself. I'm also important. I'm also something here. It's not only God's house. I also have an important agenda. There's another agenda here. It's that false agenda that the Alter Rebbe is talking about. There's an agenda here. Which other agendas exist? It's a falsehood. Is there another agenda in this world other than God's agenda? But Klippa says, I too exist. My want right now is important. Sometimes even more important than what God wants. Think about yourself the last 24 hours. How many times did you do things that were for your own agenda outside of God's agenda or independent of God's agenda? So this is what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. He's not saying don't enjoy this world. Enjoy the world, but never forget who's the host. That's all. And when you start forgetting who the host is, you started perpetuating an ultimate falsehood. And that's the falsehood that you have to break down. You have to shout it down. Because it's a very powerful falsehood. It is very, very powerful. Our own agenda is extremely, extremely powerful. What does MLPS stop mean? And the power, the Klippa reality that God created it this way to give us a challenge, so that we overcome it. But it's a very powerful force. And on top of that, you see the problem with this parable I give of a wedding, of a party you're making in your house. The host is always there and you can see him. It's hard to forget that there's a host. It's hard to forget that you're at someone else's wedding. Because the bride is right there. The groom is right there. You see him. In this party, we don't see God. You don't see the host. Well, what do you see? You see yourself. You see your needs. You see your wants. You see your agenda more than God's agenda. It's such a difficult problem. It's even, the parable is sometimes we don't really connected, because how could you ever forget that you're at someone else's wedding? You'll never forget that, right? You'll never forget it because you see the bride and the groom. But in this particular situation, we absolutely do forget because we don't see the host. And this is not an hour or 5-hour wedding. This is a 120-year wedding that we have to always be constantly remembering there's a host even though we don't see the host. So it's a big challenge. Klippa is not easy to overcome. You follow what I'm saying? It's not easy to overcome. But could you argue that klippa is it's a falsehood?
It's a test of willpower.
Before we get to that, it's a falsehood. It's the ultimate lie. What's the real truth? God was here before. He's going to be here after. God is it. He created this whole thing, and He had a purpose and an agenda for it. He put us here for that purpose, for that agenda.
We don't own anything here. We're renting everything.
We're renting everything, or you own it legally, halachically. There are laws in the Torah that give you ownership of certain things. But ultimately, you're right. It's entrusted to you, for you to utilize it for God's agenda. Your house is entrusted to you, your possessions to you, and your possessions to you. And same thing with everyone else. But we utilize these possessions for God. We hope that we do some. Some give an hour of God to God. Some give a little more to God. Some a little less. But God is saying, "Wait a minute. This is, I'm the host. What are you forgetting about me? Even for 5 minutes, how do you forget about me?" So klippa is not easy to overcome. This is a very, very difficult klippa because we don't see God. We see klippa. We see the falsehood. We see the shell. What's the shell? Us. Our needs. Our reality. We present ourselves as something independent of God's agenda. And that's the biggest lie. So you have to talk that down. You have to scream that down. You have to shout it down. There's no other way. Like that guy that squats in your house. You're going to start the reasoning with him. You don't remember I sent you the invitation. You shout him out. You got to shout him out. Your son's going to come. You're a despicable person. How did you do this? How do you take over someone else's house? He was nice enough to bring you in there. How do you do this? How do you move around this furniture? You have to scream it down. There's no other way to deal with such a lie, with such a falsehood. It's a brazen falsehood. A guy that comes into your house because of the kindness of your heart, you invited him for dinner, and he stays and takes over your house and starts moving everything around. It's brazen. It's unbelievably brazen. How does a person behave that way? So you're going to go niceties with such a person?
You can't.
You can't. You have to shout him down. You say, what kind of chazer are you? The klippa is the same. It's the same despicable behavior, if you think about it. It's the same exact thing. And that's what Alter Rebbe is saying over here. You're wondering why the neshama is not piercing through your heart, your feelings. You perpetuated a life for how many years? For 50, 60 years. And you gave into it. So now you're wondering why you don't feel God. It became your klippa became so much stronger and so much coarse and so much thicker. Then now you're wondering that the light of the soul is when you do want to feel an inspiration, that it's not shining through. How is it supposed to shine through? You have to break it down. You have to crack it open. And crack it open is sometimes with a hammer. That proverbial hammer. You got to shout it down, break it down, splinter it up. You with me? Shall we continue? I want to read the last few lines of 129 again. Right after the question, the last 4 lines of 129. But thou, who is repulsive, does deny the truth. What's the truth? Which is plain to see by physical sight, that everything in his presence is truly like nothing at all. The physical sight, huh? You see that with physical sight. That everything in his presence is truly like nothing at all. Meaning that only God exists, everything else. You see that? With physical sight. It's an interesting statement. Let's read a little further and we'll explain what he means over here. Let me give a little introduction to what he's going to be speaking now. Well, the Rebbe is going to say there like this. How do we know about God? Eric, how do you know about God? Not a trick question, by the way. No. Your mother told you.
That's right.
Your father told you. Your rabbi told you. You read it in the book. You read the Torah. You know about God, right?
Yeah.
Someone told you. You heard about it. How did it get into your consciousness? Through your ears. Someone told you about it. Whoever it is, you heard the news that God exists. Do you see Him? You never saw God.
You're supposed to believe. Feel it.
Right, but you have to know about it in order to believe it. If no one ever says there's a God, you're not going to. So you got the knowledge through your ears. You heard about it. There's a very big difference between seeing something and hearing something, right? We all know that. There's a very big difference. When you see something, it becomes etched in your mind, and no one can ever
Take it away.
make you have doubt that you saw it. Imagine if someone tells you now, the biggest professor, the biggest engineers, the biggest scientists come into this room now in an hour when you're outside when you go outside, yeah? Imagine in an hour from now you're going to meet the greatest scientists, the greatest physicists, and they're going to convince you that it's impossible that 1 hour at 10:15 on Sunday, today, you saw this table in this room. Because the atmospheric energy and they'll give you a whole explanation that it's impossible that this table was in here because it would have dissolved, and they're convincing. Would you be convinced that this table wasn't here an hour ago? An hour before? You were here. You saw this table. There's no one can ever convince you that this table was not here right now. They can give you the greatest explanations ever. But this table in your mind was here. No, there's no doubt once you saw it. But if I told you, I'm a pretty, you trust me, right? Most of you trust me, I hope. And I came to you in your house tomorrow. And I told you, I was just on Indian Trace, and there was an accident. 4 cars got into a collision. The police came and they helicoptered someone to the hospital. I told you the story as it happened. Are you going to doubt me that happened? No, you're going to believe me. You'll believe me. You trust me. You're going to believe me. But if an hour later someone came to you and said, it's impossible that happened. Because on Indian Trace, when he said that accident happened, there was a big parade and there were no cars on the street. It's impossible that there was an accident that was just described to you. Now you're going to be in doubt. You're not going to know did this accident happen or not. The difference is this you only heard and this you saw. The table you saw, that accident. If you saw the accident, you can have 100 people tell you that it didn't happen and you know it happened. Seeing is not hearing. Hearing and seeing are two different things. A Yid, or maybe for that matter any person, our greatest accomplishment, the greatest accomplishment is when God becomes so real to us as if we saw it. We saw it. Now, are you sure that you have a brain? Did you ever see your brain? No. Did you ever see your light, your nefesh, your life force that's animating your body? No. So you never saw it, right? But are you convinced that can anyone convince you that you don't have a life force animating your body? No one can ever convince you that. You are. It's absolute recognition in your mind, in your mind's eye. Something called the mind's eye. There are certain things, even though you never saw them with your physical eyes, but it's as if you saw them. It is so true in your consciousness that it's as if you saw them. The fact that you have a soul animating your body, you don't see the soul, you don't know what the soul is made up of, but you're absolutely convinced that you are not dead. And there's something animating your body. You are absolutely convinced that you have a brain in your head. That's you know that you have intelligence. Though you never saw it. You feel it, you recognize it. You don't see it with your eye, but you see it with your mind's eye. It's an absolute recognition. In the same way, we have the ability to know God. Why is that? Because we have a neshama. Your neshama is a part of God. So for a yid who has a neshama within him, it's like he sees God, he feels God, he is God. God is part of his DNA, it's part of his existence, it's part of his identity. So you may not see it with your eyes, you don't see a brain with your eyes either, but you know, you're absolutely certain that you have a brain, because you recognize it, you feel it. With your soul, the same thing with God. Why don't we have that absolute recognition of God, the way we would like to have? The reason is simple, because of the klipa within us. The klipa obscures it. It covers it up. Right? So you're blocking it. It's there, but it's blocked. So what happens when you break down the klipa? The problem is we're born into the klipa reality. The minute we're born, we're already overtaken a little bit by this klipa. The baby cries because it feels its stomach needs right now milk from his mother. He wants to nurse. The baby cries because it's hungry. It's not thinking about God. It's his reality. I need it right now. I'm hungry. Until you give me my milk, I'm going to cry and scream. And I'm going to drive everyone crazy. It's not the baby's fault, but that's just the human condition. The human condition is governed by klipa. That's who we are. So when could we ever when could we really have that absolute recognition that God is as if we saw it? Because from the moment we're born, the blocking is going on already. That obscuring the klipa shell reality is already part of our existence. So when does God become so ingrained in our mind that it's as if we see it? Only when you crack it open, the klipa, and you break it open. Then your neshama can start shining, and it becomes like, it's like your brain. You know you have a brain, even though you never saw it. You recognize it. God becomes real, because it's in you. It starts shining in you. But till you do that, you can never really have that absolute recognition, as if you see it. So the Alter Rebbe is going to end off this chapter by saying that there's another side benefit by breaking down the klipa, by talking it down, shouting it down, by piercing through it. That finally you can reach the ultimate accomplishment, which is to see God as if you saw it with your own eyes. Because you remove the blockage. Just to give one other example of this idea of screaming it down, shouting down the klipa. I talked about klipa being a falsehood, and I gave you an example of someone squatting in your house and so on. Let's talk more down to earth, if you will. Are you addicted to anything? Do you have an addiction? Hopefully not. But imagine an addicted person. A person has an addiction to alcohol, or an addiction to his phone. He can't break away from his phone. He's on his phone 10 hours a day. He can't break away from the phone. There's kids like that, by the way.
Yeah, a lot.
You really want to get out of this addiction. So you try, you go to a psychologist, it's not easy. Or you're addicted to cigarettes. You're addicted to nicotine. You really want to stop smoking. What should you do? You tried everything. You tried the electronic cigarettes. You tried this. You tried that. Garnished health. Nothing is helping. Right? You're a doctor. You know what addictions are. You see it every day. What does this person who's addicted to cigarettes have to do? He has to develop a hatred to cigarettes. He has to look at the cigarette and see how disgusting this is for him. He has to articulate it. This thing is so destructive to my lungs. It's going to turn my lungs into black flesh, into black tissue. It's going to kill me from cancer. You have to talk to the cigarette. The next time it rears its ugly head, you get a cigarette in your hand, you have to say to it, you are despicable. You are destroying my life. You're going to turn my lung into black tissue. I'm going to get cancer and die and have terrible, terrible emphysema because of you. The more you do that, there's a chance, you know what's going to happen? You're going to take that cigarette and you're going to throw it away.
That happened to me.
You got to talk to this addiction and scream at it and articulate in your mind how despicable this is for you. It's the same with klipa. We're addicted to ourselves, to self-centered pleasures. We're addicted to it. Could you say you're not? Every one of us is addicted to it, to different degrees. Some want it all day, but we're addicted to ourselves. It's not a bad thing, it's a fact. We're born that way. But it's not. But it's a falsehood. It's the ultimate destroyer of our relationship with God.
Step-by-step process to
Yes,
reverse.
but the concept of talking down and shouting it down is the same idea. It's an addiction. Our self-centered pleasures are an addiction.
No question.
And it's the greatest obstacle to a real relationship with God. Now, someone that says, so I won't have a relationship with God, who cares? Which is the case of many. So they're not bothered by their relationship. I won't have a relationship with God. It's not killing me. But it is.
It's easier.
It's easier not to have a relationship with God, or it's to some
just don't
degree.
care.
Then you realize one day what's my life all about. But a lot of people go through life and they're just fine without a relationship with God. So it doesn't bother them. Fine. Next, it's hard to really. You have to develop an interest, obviously, first, and recognize the problem. 100 years ago, no one knew that cigarettes kills you, so there was no problem. Everyone smoked.
Yeah.
But once you know there's a problem and you're addicted, then what do? I have to do something about it. Obviously, if no one ever told you about the importance of having a relationship with God and the truth of God, that there's only one God, that everything else is an extension of Him, so you're not going to be bothered by the klipa reality. It's just fine, right? But we're talking about someone that recognizes that klipa is the greatest destruction to our relationship with God. This is a person that's going to have this is a person that wants to figure out, okay, I need to figure out, how do I fix this problem? That's who he's talking to, chapter 28, 27, 28, 29. He's talking about Tabeni that wants a relationship with God, but he has a klipa reality that he has to deal with, and it's driving him, and he sometimes feels dullness of heart. The klipa is really thick. That's who he's addressing over here. And he's addressing all of us at different level. We're not Beinanis. We're not people that don't sin ever. But we'd like to have a relationship with God. We'd like to deal with some of our addictions to things that are unholy and I don't mean addictions, but you know what I mean. We would like to have a deeper relationship with God. We'd like to grow. But it's not easy. We're sidetracked. We're pulled in every which way direction. So Alter Rebbe says, this is an addiction. Talk down, scream it down. It's a falsehood. We're squatters in God's world, in God's house. We're moving around this furniture. How could you do this? How could you behave this way? So you scream at a squatter. What kind of chutzpah, what kind of brazen behavior is this? You came into God's living room and you started moving around this furniture. You don't want to leave when He wants you to leave. Or in God's world, He doesn't want us to leave. He wants us to live here, obviously. But He wants you to remember that this is His party. Don't behave as if it's your house. And you took over. You kicked God out of the house and finished. And you took over. Imagine the chutzpah of such a thing. So you're surprised that the Alter Rebbe says to shout down such chutzpah? You have to shout it down. You don't go with kid gloves to that. So that's what he's saying now. We'll go for another 5-10 minutes. In this way, we're on page 131. In this way, when you break down the klippe, he will help his divine soul to enlighten her eyes. Her eyes, right, that she can see with the truth of the unity of the light of the Ein Sof. You begin to have a recognition of the truth of God for real. With a perceptive vision, and not merely by cognition alone. God has to become absolute in your mind. Not just that you heard about it and it makes sense, and I believe it till the next problem comes and I start having doubts. No. It has to become a real recognition, like with the eye, like vision. As it were, as explained elsewhere, that this is the core of the whole divine service. To reach a point where God becomes real. Absolutely real. And the explanation is that in truth there is no substance whatever in the Sitra Achra. We're breaking it down, right? Why are we shouting it down, breaking it down? Why? Because the truth is there's nothing there. There really is nothing there. Klipa is a falsehood. Wherefore it is compared to darkness which has no substance whatsoever. And consequently is banished in the presence of light. The minute you bring in light into a dark room, the darkness goes by the wayside, it's gone. You don't have to fight darkness, you don't have to chase. They say, it's an old state saying, you don't chase out darkness with a broomstick. You just put on a match, put on a candle, the darkness disappears. Sitra Achra, the other side, Klip is not a real existence. You don't have to shine a light and it's gone. Shine the truth. Similarly, the Sitra Achra, which although it possesses abundant vitality wherewith to animate all impure animals and the souls of the nations of the world, and also the animal soul of the Jew, it's animating most of this world. It's got a lot of power in it, right? As has been explained. Nevertheless, has no vitality of its own, God forbid. It's not like it stands on its own 2 feet, but derives it from the realm of holiness, as has been explained above. Therefore, it is completely nullified in the presence of holiness. The moment, how does Klippa nurture? This is going to take a little longer to explain. We'll probably have to finish this up next week. But the point that he's saying over here is, how does Klippa live? Off holiness. It nurtures off holiness. It has no existence of its own. It doesn't have a reservoir of vitality of its own. It must nurture from holiness.
Off of people's weaknesses.
For people weaknesses, because we have an internal holiness. So when we begin to sin, it gets a hold of us. We have in the neshama a reservoir of vitality and sucks off of that. But it doesn't have its own reservoir of vitality. It must get its vitality from God. The only reason that it has the strength to present itself as it does, that it's important and it's this, is because holiness is obscured. The minute holiness stops being obscured, the klipa falls away. There's nothing to it. Then holiness takes over. You understand? Nevertheless, has no vitality of its own, God forbid, but derives it from the realm of holiness, as has been explained above. Therefore, it is completely nullified in the presence of holiness, as darkness is nullified before physical light. Except that in regard to the holiness of the divine soul in man, the Holy One, blessed be He, has given the animal soul permission and ability to raise itself against the divine soul in order. Why does it have that ability to raise itself and to present that falsehood? In order that man should be challenged to overcome it, and to humble it by means of the humility and submission of his spirit, and his abhorring in himself that which is despicable, as we've explained in this whole chapter. So that's why God did this. He gave the animal soul such power over us to present it, to be able to stand up against the godly soul, for us to overcome it. And through the impulse from below comes an impulse from above. To fulfill what is written, hence will I bring thee down says the Lord. Namely, what happens is, he's saying over here now, that there's a rule that when a man below is aroused to do something for Hashem, Hashem also, in response, it triggers a response from God. So when we crush the sitra achra, the klipa within us, by the means that we explained till now, Hashem will also, that will elicit a response from Hashem that He will crush it down to and put an end to it once and for all, to the whole klipa reality. That's what He's saying. And through the impulse from below comes an impulse from above to fulfill what is written. Hence will I, meaning Hashem, bring thee down, says the Lord, referring to klipa and all negative. Namely, depriving it of its dominion, which God gave it, and power, and withdrawing from it the strength and authority which had been given it, to rise up against the light of the holiness of the divine soul. It was given that power to stand up against the divine soul. When a yid crushes it down, Hashem responds, takes it away, and puts an end to it. And then what's left? The divine soul. What is the divine soul? The divine soul sees God. Doesn't need to be told about God. You don't need to be told about God. Your klipa has to be told about God. Your brain may have to be told, but your neshama is God. It's a piece of God. That's its existence. Whereupon it inevitably becomes nullified and is banished, meaning the klipa is banished once the soul starts shining, just as darkness is nullified before physical light. Let's go a little further. Indeed, he says, we find this explicitly stated in the Torah in connection with the story of the spies. You remember the story of the spies? Moshe sends 10, 12 people to Israel. You know the story? He sends 12 people to Israel to spy out the land before they're going to go conquer it. 10 men come back and give a terrible report, and they demoralize the Jewish people. We don't want to go to Israel. We're going back to Egypt. It was a terrible, terrible time. You know the story, right? But then Moshe, God gets angry, and God tells Moshe to tell the Jews they're going to be punished. They're going to stay in this. Every one of these people are not going to Israel. You don't want to go? Now I'm not letting you go. They're all going to die in the desert over 40 years. They're going to wander in the desert for 40 years. Only their children will go into Israel. When the Jewish people found out about this, they started crying. They did tshuva, they repented. First they were demoralized, they didn't want to go. But once God gave them the punishment, now they want to go. And it says what happened right after that story. It says the Jews told the nation, no, we're going. Moshe said, if now you go, you're on God's protection. Don't start up, don't go. And they tried anyway, and they started climbing the mountain towards, and Amalek came and destroyed them. A lot of people. It was ugly. So now he's drawing upon that story to prove what he's saying. Look what he said. Indeed, we find this explicitly stated in the Torah in connection with the spies, who at the outset declared, what did the spies say at the outset? For he is stronger than we. We can't conquer Israel. They're too strong for us. We shouldn't go. Read not then we, but then he. They said not that the people in Israel are stronger than us. They said the people in Israel are stronger than God. Even God can't provide for us a miracle here. This is how bad it was. They started denying that God has the ability to take them to Israel. Can you imagine that? They almost stopped believing. But afterwards, they reversed themselves and announced, lo, we will readily go up. We want to go to Israel. What happened? All of a sudden they started believing in God again. Whence did their faith in God, God's ability return to them? Where did that come from? How did it return to them? Our teacher Moses, peace unto him, had not meanwhile shown them any sign or wonder concerning this. It's not like he sat down with them. No, God can do it, and I'll show you a miracle, and I'll show you how God can do it. Nothing of the sort happened. So where did they get back their faith from? He had only told them that the Lord was angry with them, and had sworn not to allow them to enter the land. Why should this have influenced them, and of what avail was this to them, if they did not believe, heaven forbid, in the Lord's ability to subdue the 31 kings which lived in Israel? For which reason they had no desire, whatever, to enter the land. Where did this sudden faith in God come from? You get the question?
Yeah.
It's not like Moshe sat down with them and gave them a lecture or showed them a sign. They didn't believe in God 10 minutes ago, right? Or a day ago. All of a sudden they believe, no, we want to go, God's going to do it for us. He could or he couldn't. What happened? He explains it, but undoubtedly, since the Israelites themselves are believers, the descendants of Jews believe. They have a neshama. You don't have to tell them that God exists. That's not what you need to tell them. They have it within them, and they have a neshama. They have a deep inner recognition about God. Except the problem is the sitra achra, the klippus, raises its ugly head and blocks that faith sometimes, which is clothed in their bodies, has risen against the light of the holiness of their divine soul, in their impudent haughtiness and arrogance, without sense or reason, saying that God can't do it. A chutzpah, could you imagine the clip of their, said to them, they blocked the light of their neshama. That's what happened over there. That's why they said, no, God can't do it. It was the klippah that was blocking the truth. Now, therefore, as soon as the Lord had become angered against them and thundered angrily, screamed, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation? They heard such strong words against them. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness. God said, you're all going to die in this wilderness. I, the Lord, have spoken. I will surely do it unto all this evil congregation. Strong words they suddenly heard from Moses in the name of God. Their heart was humbled. It broke their sitra achra. That's what happened. Those words crushed the sitra achra, the klippah. Their heart was humbled and broken within them when they heard these stern words. As is written, and the people mourned greatly. Consequently, the sitra achra toppled from its dominion, from its haughtiness and arrogance, leaving the Israelites to their inborn faith. They reverted back to the natural self. What's the natural self? The neshama. You took away the blockage, the screen, the neshama starts shining. It's not that they didn't have faith before. They had a big klippah that blocked everything. You took away the klippah. God crushed the klippah. They started, no, we want to go. Their wanting to go was not their hypocritical. That was the true self. From the above, every person in whose mind entered doubts as to his faith can deduce that they are nothing more than empty words of the sitra achra. When you have questions, does really God exist? Is this true? Is the Torah true? It's nonsense words from the sitra achra that has risen its ugly head, which raises itself against the soul. But the Israelites themselves are faithful. Furthermore, the sitra achra itself entertains no doubts about faith. It's interesting. The sitra achra itself doesn't believe in God. The sitra achra knows that God exists. Its whole existence is only because God exists. He knows that he's independent on God. The sitra achra is not a liar. Is not a non-believer. The sitra achra knows, except that she has been given permission to confuse man with words of falsehood and deceit, in order that he may acquire greater reward, as the harlot seeks to seduce the king's son with falsehood and deceit, with the king's approval, as in the parable mentioned in the Holy Zohar. Let me tell you the parable. You know the parable?
You explained it to me.
We learned it before already. You know the parable of the harlot. A king has a son, a prince. The kid is a massive, wonderful kid. He got in the best teachers, the best nutritionists. He's perfect. One day, and the king is very proud of him. One day, his good advisor comes to the king and says, you know, you're proud of your son, but you don't really know his character. You never tested his character. You gave him everything good. He doesn't know anything other than you and the kingdom and all the good. Give him a little test. See, test his character. The king says, you know, you're right. I don't really know my son. How would he do in the circumstance? I'm not so good. So the king does the following. He calls up a harlot. He hires a harlot and calls her in for a meeting. Says, listen to me. You're going to be used to be testing my son, his character. You're going to dress up and you're going to make yourself up. You're going to present yourself in the best way you can to seduce him. My hope is that he doesn't fall for this, and that he overcomes the temptation to be with you, and that he shows a strong character. But you, harlot, he tells her, your job is to try your hardest to get him to sin. Right? Now, so the harlot, faithful to the king, what does she do? She's torn, right? On the one hand, she must do what the king said. That's the king's orders. On the other hand, she doesn't want the prince to sin. She's hoping that he doesn't sin. That he doesn't sin with her. Because she doesn't want to cause the king aggravation so she's torn between two worlds. On the one hand, she has to do what the king said. What's the bottom line? The bottom line that she has to do what the king told her to do. So she's going to make every effort that this boy sins with her, hoping that he doesn't. But she's not going to let that hope get her to not do the job well. So she'll say, I won't make myself up good. I won't dress up so nice. No, she has to do everything she can to make him sin, with the hope that he doesn't. That's the Yitzhara, that's Sitra Achra. You think the Sitra Achra doesn't know that the king exists, that God exists? But God told Sitra Achra, you present the lie to the Jew. You present yourself as if there's some existence besides me, with the hope that he breaks you down, that he doesn't listen to you. So the Sitra Achra is fooled over here. He doesn't know the truth. The Sitra Achra was given a job to be a blockage, to be the curtain over the window, not to let the sun shine through, hoping that you break it down. So who's fooled over here? The only one that's fooled is us. So that's what happened over there in the desert. They didn't need a new miracle to convince them that God exists. They have a neshama. They don't need any new miracle. The Sitra Achra raised its ugly head and said, no, you can't go to Zudan. God knocked down the Sitra Achra by saying such harsh words to them. You're all going to die in the desert and I'm angry with you. And he shouted it down. So the Sitra Achra was nullified. What happens when you nullify the Sitra Achra? The neshama starts shining again. So in that case, God did it for the Jewish people. In our case, he doesn't do it for us. We have to do it. We have to shout it down. We have to recognize that this cigarette is the most dangerous thing for us, for our relationship with God. So does it mean you should stop eating? No. Does it mean you should stop enjoying the party in the host's house? No. Just remember, there's a host, that's it. And never forget that for a second. And with every bite that you take, and with every music, the joy, wonderful piece of music that you hear, you're thanking, you realize it's all for the host, to celebrate his party. And that's Kedusha. That's holiness. Where everything in this world is not, you're not nullifying this table, this food, this. No. The food is going to be used for God, the table is going to be used for God, my vacation is going to be used for God. Everything's going to be holy. That's holiness. When you remove the klipa, falsehood, holiness starts shining. So does a Yid need to be convinced that God exists? A Yid has it b're'iyah, he sees it. He sees it like he sees his brain. Doesn't see it with his eyes, but he knows it. The problem is that sometimes we go comatose, the brain stops working. You have to break that down, that's it. Break the klipa. So when a Yid comes to Yom Kippur, to Shul, hey, Moshe's a hypocrite, right? Where was he all year? He was not it. When he's coming Yom Kippur to Shul, that's his real self. That's his neshama shining through finally. All year round, the klipa is taking over. So at least once a year, the klipa disappeared for a minute, for a day. So you can call that hypocritical? That's not hypocritical. The hypocritical behavior, if anything, is the other 364 days a year. Our neshama, and that's the beauty of crushing the klipa. When you do that, you start having a real recognition of God. Only when you break down the klipa and the sitra achra could the neshama become, could you suddenly have an appreciation for God and a recognition of God like you see it. Because you do see it. It's your neshama. The problem is, since the day you're born, the neshama was blocked by this massive klipa called the body and its human soul, which presents itself as something also important. But when you say you're important only because you can serve God, and everything you do with your body and your human soul should be an extension of God's truth, then everything is fine. Then your neshama is taking over. When the klipa disappears, the neshama takes over. It's not easy. It's easier said than done, but that's the mission in life. And with that, I say, have a wonderful day and a wonderful week, and we'll be back next Sunday to start chapter 30 finally.
Thank you very much.